Well, welcome to another episode of JC Unplugged. We've got an in-studio guest, Jay Campbell. Thank you so much for joining us. So you are the co-founder of BioLongevity Labs. You're a best-selling author of 6 books now?
6 books.
6 books, best-selling books. You've been featured on ABC, NBC, now CBS, Muscle and Fitness magazine. But in my mind, you are like the godfather of peptides, the master of peptides, globally known for your peptide knowledge. Would that bio be correct? How do you describe yourself to people?
So first off, JC, thank you so much for having me. Recently, I was like, man, I would love, you wanted to actually do, I think it's Zoom, virtual. And I was like, man, I'm going to be invited. That's how we, let's do it virtual. So thank you so much for having me. I appreciate and receive all of that. Yes. So I think my internet claim to fame actually comes from being one of the first people to write a masterpiece book, which is globally considered the Testosterone Optimization Therapy Bible, which, as I told you, I came here in this news station, I think in 2018, to talk about.
Yeah.
But at the same time that I was learning about hormones and writing about that, I was obviously also using peptides. And when I tell people that I've been using therapeutic peptides since 2003 and 4, they kind of go, what? You know? So technically, like, as you said, I truly am an OG in space. What I mean by that is that I've been using all of these things on myself, with my wife, on my clients, people in my inner circle, and of course in my audience for more than 2 decades, right? So I really understand this, not just from like a user level, but also from a scientific level, because I'm really one of those nerdy guys that, goes deep into the weeds and really looks at the research. Now, a lot of people perceive that there isn't a lot of research on peptides, and that's actually not true because the research comes out of Russia, right? So Dr. Victor Kavinson, who died actually in the end of 2023, but he is like the father of peptides and bioregulators. And they have 60 years of published research in Russia. Mm-hmm. Now, the problem is that, unless you can speak Bulgarian, read Russian, or either or,
I can't.
You couldn't access that data. But as you know now with AI, they're translating a lot of this stuff.
Okay.
So smart people have access to all this stuff. So when people like Andrew Huberman, shout out to Andrew Huberman, go online and say, oh, there's no studies on peptides other than in rats. It's not actually true, right? But again, in the United States, from a published standpoint, like peer review, there isn't a lot. So that's what they're kind of talking about. But from a global perspective, there's a ton of research. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of people that do understand peptides from a scientific level. I seem to be one of the few, I guess, probably that is publicly out talking. I'm sure there's a bunch of scientists behind the scenes that know, but they really do represent, I think, a fundamental change to the medical system and ultimately allopathic healing, or if you really want to just call it quantum healing, as I call it, because I think you know this, and we'll talk about this. They address the root cause of illness, disease, and dysregulation, right? So if you take a peptide correctly, and we can get into that because obviously a lot of people do not do that, you really can cure whatever it is that ails you.
Well, what is a peptide? And I feel like peptides have really taken off over the past, at least in my mind, in my world, in the past year.
Yes.
People say, oh, I want to get on peptides. I'm going to take peptides. Well, what is a peptide?
So peptide is literally, at essence, is a fractionated protein or a chain of amino acids. And the longer the chain, the more likely you probably have to inject it versus the shorter it can probably be consumed orally. But all peptides are literally found as signaling molecules in human cells, right? So for example, body protective compound 157, which most people, probably some of your audience who are familiar with peptides already know. It's called the Wolverine peptide or the healing peptide. Mm-hmm. People use it to accelerate healing. It's actually found in human gastric juice, right? So again, naturally occurring amino acid group. And when you obviously use DPC-157, whether you inject it, you snort it, you put it under skin, or you swallow a capsule, it definitely does speed the rate of healing. But all peptides, because they're organically found as signaling molecules, again, chains of amino acids, are very safe. In fact, in my experience of using peptides for 21 years, I've never seen a person OD.
Okay.
Now, again, people misuse them to inaccurate dosing. They take super physiologic levels. Of course, in America, more is better, as a lot of people think. But that's not never. It's really never probably, or not necessarily ever, the case with peptides. But if you compare peptides to, say, allopathic, Rockefeller petroleum distillate medications, which, as you know, when they break down in the body, they cause symptoms and side effects because petroleum distillate is like oil residue, right?
Okay.
So it causes issues in the body. Whereas with peptides, because they're naturally found in organic signaling molecules, they don't do that. So they have a lot less effect from a side effect standpoint and they go to work addressing usually like the specific organ or the specific biological system because of the way they're found actually in the human body.
If you start taking a peptide for whatever reason, and I feel like there's so many, and I've been just devouring your content, by the way. I've heard you talk about peptides for glowing skin, peptides to get rid of brain fog, peptides, you said the Wolverine to get rid of inflammation. Once you take it, do you have to continually take it for the rest of your life? What happens when you stop taking? You lose all the effects of the peptide?
No, so that's actually a great question. So if we compare therapeutic peptides to therapeutic testosterone or therapeutic hormones, once a person makes the decision to go on therapeutic hormones, and obviously I've been on therapeutic testosterone since 1999, 26 years now because I'm 55. Mm-hmm. And my story, which I told it on this station, a long time ago, was very well known. I got kicked in the testicles, and I went down and I went to an endocrinologist. I was living in Southern California in Pasadena, and he put me on therapeutic testosterone. And the rest is history. I wrote a bunch of books, and at the same time, I was using therapeutic testosterone. I learned about peptides, but the difference is when you go on therapeutic testosterone or really any therapeutic hormones, like if you're a woman and you're on progesterone or estradiol, you do have to stay on that forever because now you're replacing your body's endogenous, which is your natural production.
Okay.
But with peptides, because they're signaling molecules and your body's making them anyway, when you do use them, again, therapeutically, every now and then, cycling, as people talk or call that, you don't have to stay on it and you can retain the benefits. Obviously, the benefits are going to be retained by your lifestyle, right? And I think that's critically important that everyone who's listening to this amazing show that we're doing right now understands that peptides, therapeutic hormones, anything really, there's no magic bullets, right? Mm-hmm. Lifestyle is always the most important tool, or the most important component. The peptides and the hormones are just tools. And so when your lifestyle's dialed in and you throw in a peptide, regardless of what it is, and we can get into the various ones, it can dramatically improve the lifestyle, right? Mm-hmm. But the basic lifestyle, I think that I should just nail and just say right now is obviously, if you have a hormone deficiency, which so many people do because our environment is so contaminated, right? Like here in Las Vegas, stare out from the mountain blue and look at them spraying the skies all day long. I mean, that's everything, right? It's like we live in a contaminated environment. So first step is, do I have a hormone deficiency? If I do, I need to change my lifestyle to fix that. If I can't do it naturally, I can take therapeutic hormones. And then for that, as you already know this, because you're obviously clean, fit and healthy, exercise, right? You gotta lift weights. You gotta do cardiovascular training. Some people are like, oh, I don't lift weights. I just do bone bearing Pilates or hot Pilates. Okay, that's fine. Whatever. It's got to be bone bearing resistance to build muscle, right? Because I think people need to understand the way you ensure you live the longest is by being the leanest, right? So the more muscle you build as you age, the more healthy you're ultimately going to be. And again, statistics prove people that are lean live the longest. All the blue zones, that are living into their hundreds and stuff like that, they don't have any fat. They don't have any cellular function. Mm-hmm. So it's like, again, live lean, lift weights, do cardiovascular training. And I think the other thing that's obviously most important is the diet is huge, right? And I call it living insulin controlled. And what that means is we want to eat enough carbohydrates to fuel our body's energetic demand, right? So if you lift weights, you're going to need carbohydrates, right? If you're called a triathlete or one of those ultra endurance people, you can probably do a ketogenic diet. So everybody has to eat relative to their body's energetic demand, and so as long as you keep what I call insulin controlled, you reduce the amount of carbohydrates you eat around specific times, then you're going to be leaner and less inflamed. So again, if you have those four components dialed in, and then you start using peptides, which we can talk about, or therapeutic testosterone, or et cetera, that's when you're going to feel a lot better and also look a lot better. But most people make the mistake. They listen to, a show like this, or they watch it on an influencer on TikTok or Instagram, screaming about peptides, and they jump on peptides, but they don't have the lifestyle dialed in and say they don't get good results.
Well, Ozempic is a peptide, correct?
Exactly.
It's GLP-1?
Yes, GLP-1
And there's GLP-2, 3, and
exactly
as well.
Yeah, GLP-4 is coming, but GLP. Let's talk about that. So GLP-1 is, and so people understand, glucagon-like peptide is what GLP stands for.
Okay,
and it is a peptide that is responsible for suppressing appetite, improving what is called glucagon signaling, and when you have that, you essentially you slightly bump metabolic rate and you suppress appetite. When you get into GLP-2, and by the way, so people understand, GLP-1 is Wegovy, right? And most people know what Wegovy is from the shots. GLP-2 is tirzepatide, and that's found in Mounjaro. GLP-3, which you and I were talking off air, is coming very soon, and that's an Eli Lilly drug. that's called retatrutide. And so the difference between 1, 2, and 3 is that 2, GLP-2, also in addition to suppressing appetite, improves glucagon stimulation, which again, it slightly improves metabolic rate. And then GLP-3, which is retatrutide, has the glucagon stimulation, the appetite suppression, and then also nutrient partitioning and insulin signaling. So very true, and you know this, but I sent you this link this morning. Retatrutide is the greatest drug in the history of modern medicine. It is not even approved, but in the research community, like with BioLongevity Labs and other companies like mine, we've been using it since 2023, right? So that we already know that, most of the smart people in the peptide space know how amazing this drug is. But the trial data that came out this morning, which is what I sent you, also shows that it cures cancer.
It's just wild.
Lung cancer. Right? It was like 90% of the people in the trial that had some sort of an early onset metastatic tumor formation, it was gone after 1 year of use of it.
This is Eli
Lilly's drug.
So this is like a real deal out there, real case studies out there.
So remember, all these GLP products have 6, 8, 10 years of actual scientific studies before they prove them. But we must use caveat, as I always say, JC, is that a lot of people in these studies are metabolic dumpster fires, right? They're not healthy people. They're type 2 diabetic, they're obese, they don't take care of themselves. So you have to really look at the studies and understand that it's not relative to healthy people, but at the same time, there's people like me and there's other people out there who have been in the space using them with healthy people. And so we kind of can, just comb through the difference of like the people in the studies who are not healthy versus the people who are healthy, who are using it, for lifestyle and longevity purposes. And that's kind of how we figure out where the dosing is. But I'll just say it's like with, to put a nail on it or wrap it up for GLPs, the best way to use them for health and longevity is microdosing.
Okay.
And the problem is that the package insert on the product that most people get a script for it, they want to jack them up, right? Because again, the pharmaceutical industry is not about health. They're about making money. They're a giant for-profit division, right? So at the end of the day, the pharmaceutical company, they may make these amazing drugs, like Eli Lilly, like Novartis, but they're not about health. They're about selling as much of those drugs as possible, right? So they teach the pharmaceutical industry, the doctors, et cetera, higher dose, start them high, go higher, blow out the receptors, and that's why people have all these side effects. And that's why you see all this horrible stuff in the news about Wegovy face, Wegovy neck, Wegovy butt, all the negative
stomach issues too.
Exactly. There's a million side effects that can happen. But as I always said, and by the way, I wrote a book that came out in February of this year called Metabolic Awakening with GLP Peptides. We looked at all the studies. It's a 700-page book, 1,300 scientific studies. And all of the studies show that high dosing is what causes the side effects.
Okay.
And so if we learn how to use these correctly in the context of what I already talked about, which is lifestyle interventions, the side effects are very, very minimal and people dramatically change their life. I mean, that book has 15 people from all across the world, men and women, who literally lost hundreds of pounds using these drugs, right? And it's called the transformation chapter, but you hear their journey in their own words and how I help them or how they learned how to use these. Because again, as I say in the book, and this is the truth, 95% of people who use GLP peptides do it incorrectly from the start because they listen to their doc or they listen to the package insert that they get from the drug and they take it at that level and they whack out their receptors. You have to start with a very, very low, what I call microdose. And then that way you maintain the weight loss once it comes off you and you don't whack out your system. Yeah. And that's what most people do.
What is the best way to, because you can go on Amazon and sit there and punch in peptides and all the stuff comes up.
Exactly.
A lot of stuff is garbage out there. What is injectables the best way to take them? You take it via a pill. What is the best way to take a peptide?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So there's a lot of different ways. I think the easiest way is to explain it to people that the highest impact delivery system, so the most efficacy, always in the studies and also in personal use, is injection. Right. Okay. And again, as we talked about the sequences of amino acids, the longer the chain of the amino acids, the more likely it should be injected. But again, why is injection the highest impact delivery system? For two reasons. One, it crosses the blood-brain barrier the fastest. And two, it gets into portal or systemic circulation the fastest, right? So if you're delivering like a peptide that you have an injured shoulder, say for BPC 157, and you inject it say right up here, like locally towards where the injury is, you're going to get a much faster effect than if you would if you inject it, say, down in your leg, right? So you do want to inject for most peptides to get the most effect. But many peptides, you mentioned, the skin and the renewal or the rejuvenation peptide, like copper peptide GHKCU, You could get a transdermal formulation or a cream or a serum and rub it. Women put it on their face.
Yeah.
You can put it in your hair to regrow your hair. I mean, there's a lot of different delivery systems, but always remember injection is, and for now at least, because they are improving the delivery system technologies, but right now injection is the fastest and most proven way. And I would say after that, it depends. It could be intranasal. Again, depending on the peptide, it could be intranasal, so you can take a mist or an inhaler. You can take some are orally absorbed. They actually have new ones that are strips that you put on your tongue and they go to the roof of your mouth. And then they're absorbed through what is called the oral mucosa. So it's like the membranes of the cheek and gums.
Yeah.
And that actually gets into portal circulation and avoids the digestive tract, because if you put a peptide through you swallow a peptide, swallow, say, a capsule, it really doesn't get anywhere outside of the gut, right? So the human microbiome in the stomach is where it'll target. But beyond that, it gets broken down in the digestive tract and also in the small intestine, et cetera. So you don't get systemic absorption like you do with an injector if you use one of these strips. Okay. But I can tell you this, the cool thing is 80% of the world is afraid of peptides right now because of injections, right? They're like, I don't want to inject myself, I'm out. Right. And I always tell people that's not a big deal, because once you inject yourself once or twice with a 32 gauge insulin needle, it's like brushing your teeth. It's not hard. It's no pain. But for the psychological, again, issue of people being afraid, the technology systems that are coming are Velcro patches.
Wow.
So yeah, so you'll be able to walk up and just like put a patch on your arm, and it'll have like 40 to 80 little tiny micron, they're called micron needles, and it'll deliver whatever peptide that you want, and it'll get right into portal circulation. So it'll be just as effective as actually injecting yourself with a needle. So those are coming. And there's also other technologies which I probably shouldn't mention yet because they're not yet ready for prime time. But put it this way, within 2 years, you won't have to inject yourself. So all the people that are scared right now of injecting themselves won't need to do that.
Well, the it's BP 157.
BPC 157.
Yeah. It's like the Wolverine.
That's it. Correct.
So my wife, she has Crohn's disease.
Okay.
And she goes to an infusion center here in town to get IVs and everything. Sure. It's changed her life. And they were talking to her about doing peptides. Sure. She started the BPC 157.
Dude, I can cure Crohn's disease, just so you know.
We'll talk. Because that is a vicious, horrible disease.
It is. And all autoimmune stuff sucks.
Yeah. And we got her diet dialed in, and she wants to do it the natural way. She's been dealing with this since she was 21. She's 42 now. So it's been a long, was that?
We can fix it.
Okay. We'll chat even more.
Yeah. Sure.
So she does it as an injectable.
Yep.
You talk about it. She's injected so many medications inside. She's no problem. But she injects it just in her stomach right here. Yep. Is that how you should inject it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So most people down here in the subcutaneous fat of like the belly region, or even if the pyloric areas right there, you can inject. But anywhere, realistically, especially as you're doing this for decades of your life, you want to find places to rotate. So you can inject at IM, which is like right up here. You can inject up here, like in what that's called the gluteal fat pad in the buttocks.
Yeah.
But anywhere that you have like subcutaneous fat, again, with skin to pinch or something, you can obviously always inject there. But of course, you can also go what is called IM or shallow IM, which is intramuscular, depending on the peptide, and you'll still get the same effect.
I was looking at peptides online and stuff, and I work out. Fitness is my thing. Want to put on some more mass.
Yep.
Is there a peptide for someone that is already lean? Because a lot of the peptides I see lose weight, lose fat. Like I don't want to lose. I mean, I could lose a little
Dude,
fat.
I'm going to be your best friend by the end of this show.
I love it.
I can put you on a peptide protocol right now that you can put on 15 pounds of muscle that you'll keep for the rest of your life.
And how long are you taking this peptide for?
Depending on how hard you train and how well your diet is, 3 months tops.
Is this the God stack that you were talking about?
The 2026 God stack from Jay Campbell coming soon. Maybe I'll release the JC. So there's a product. I'll just mention you the peptides that you want to take, but we'll talk obviously now that we're friends. So we sell, BioLongevity Labs sells an exclusive product called FLGR242, and it is actually recombinant follistatin. It's the first of its time in the history of the world. Follistatin as a peptide has been around probably for 10 years. The formats of it were not as effective because they were very short acting, meaning like you inject it and it's dead in an hour.
Wow.
So bodybuilders who used it would do it to inject in areas that they wanted to have like lagging body parts, right? So like a shoulder or a delt or something like that, or even a tricep. They would inject it 3 or 4 times a day, knowing they only get 1 hour, right? So you go to the gym, you pump it up, blah, blah, blah. But my chemist, his name's Mike Farber. He's one of the most brilliant guys probably of all time. I keep saying he should get the Nobel Prize for creating this product, but this product, FLGR242, builds muscle and burns fat at the same time. And anybody can take it, men or women, regardless of age. It's actually an amazing peptide to use when you're on a GLP, because as you know, a lot of people lose muscle on GLPs because they don't do all the things that we talked about. They don't lift weights, they don't train. They don't eat enough protein. They're not hormonally optimized. So if you take FLGR when you're on actually a GLP peptide, you can prevent muscle loss. But for someone like you, FLGR 242, a growth hormone agonist peptide like a testosterone or ipamorelin, I would recommend probably for you IPA if you don't have any belly fat. And then, a mitochondrial peptide, which we can talk about, which, again, these are all things I use. MOTC, 5-amino, NAD+, what am I thinking? SS31. So those are your 4 primaries. But if we designed you a protocol with those various peptides, you absolutely could put on 15 pounds of muscle in 3 months and keep it forever. Again, assuming you train, right, what you do, obviously, you look great.
Thanks.
So clearly, as long as you maintain and don't get hit by a bus, you definitely keep it forever.
Someone's watching. Always talk to your doctor before embarking on any journey like this. But if they have questions, how do we come to you and get the answers? Because we just did 22 minutes here talking about peptides. And I have 4 questions there before I get to start to wrap things up. How do we get in touch with you? How do we find out what's the right peptide to take? Like, what's the steps we do to start this journey if someone wants to?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you'll have to have me back.
Yes, absolutely.
To find free information, you definitely want to go to my website, jaycampbell.com. That is probably the top 3 sites on the planet for free information on peptides. We have more than, I think, 125 articles that are ranked top 5 on Google, right? So if you search peptides right now, you're going to get Jay Campbell somehow, right? Because I have so much great information. Obviously, when I'm not being deleted off social media, you can follow me at Jay Campbell 333 on X is probably where I do my most damage. You found me on Instagram on my backup account. But if they go to my website, there's a bunch of places making you free information. So first off, we have the peptide cheat sheet, which is amazing because it's literally like a literal cheat sheet for every single peptide, how to use it, what the dose is, how, and again, it's totally free, how long you cycle it, how you can mix it or not mix it, but how you can stack it with other peptides, etc. And then we also have the bioregulator stacking guide and then the small molecule cheat sheet. So pretty much anything that is like the top of the, food chain in the space right now that BioLongevity has, because we are that guy. We like to say that we are becoming quickly the Amazon for biohackers, is on those 3 sheets that they can download those for free from jaycampbell.com. And again, you need to be a complete novice, never use peptides in your life. And from those 3 documents, or just PDFs, you can gain a lot of information. And I would also just say, if you want to learn how to calculate dosages, because that can kind of sometimes when you're first starting out be a little bit tricky. On my website too, we also have the peptide calculator. Which gets literally like 100,000 searches.
When you search your name in peptides, that's the first thing that comes up. It's the Google autocomplete peptide calculator.
Exactly. And it's funny because somebody attached my name to the one that we built like 5 years ago, and it just blew up, as you said, in the last 2 years as peptides became more mainstream. But that's a place to go to calculate dosing, right? Because it does get kind of weird when you're going from milligrams to IUs or micrograms to milligrams, et cetera. So that platform right there, again, on jaycampbell.com will get you everything.
Okay. Well, Jay, I got to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for joining us. I heard you were on the True Transformation podcast. That's how I heard you speak for the first time like 2 weeks ago.
Awesome.
Maybe just type in Jay Campbell on iTunes, whatever, and you do so many podcasts. There's so much information out there. I probably devoured at least 10 episodes of podcasts you were on over the past week. So thank you so much. You got to come back because I have so many more questions for you. I appreciate it.
JC, thank you so much for having me. And of course, I'll be glad to.
All right. Thank you for watching. We appreciate it.